There are a ton of great changes to Blazor in .NET 5. The speed has been improved dramatically, and the product has been further stabilized. But there are also a lot of additional features and options in Blazor. In this video, we're going to be looking at running Blazor inside of an MVC project. We're going to look at the new file input. We're going to see our changes hot reload. We're going to load 50,000 records on the screen without a problem. We're going to use encrypted browser storage and a lot more. This is a very full video, so get ready. Now, if this is your first video you've watched of mine, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. I provide videos twice a week here on YouTube to help you grow as a developer. I also have a full set of training courses on I Am Tim Corey. I would encourage you to check out all the resources I have to offer. In this video, as with most of my videos, I'm going to create some source code. If you'd like a copy of my source code, use the link in the description. You might even get a special bonus just for downloading the source code. Let's get started right away looking at the stuff inside of Blazor. And to start us off, what we're going to do is actually create an MVC project, which seems rather weird because we want to see what Blazor stuff has changed. But this is the first big change. So ASP.NET Core Web Application, hit Next. Let's call this MVC Demo, and we'll call the solution name Blazor Changes. Hit Create. And we're going to choose ASP.NET Core Web Application for .NET Core, ASP.NET Core 5.0. So that's the latest version of MVC in the latest version of .NET Core. And we're not going to have authentication turned on. We're going to leave HTTPS checked. We do want that. Now there is one additional feature, if we can zoom in here. Enable Razer Runtime Compilation. What this does is it adds a Nuget package. It's not actually going to do anything besides add that Nuget package until you enable it in your code. But this essentially what it's going to do is allow you to reload the Razer changes when you come back to it. So what would happen is you make a change to the content of the page, you go a different page and you come back. If you'd saved your code changes, those changes will be reflected on the page. It's not quite hot reload, but it's like the next time you use it, it's available now. So that's a nice feature. We're gonna go ahead and enable that. It'll hit Create. So once this gets created, what we're going to do is we're going to put into our code, this is again MVC, we're going to put in a Razer component just to show you that even if you have an MVC project, which is fully server side, it's kind of a little more old school in some ways. It's not necessarily that cutting edge in some ways because we have usually better options for web frameworks for the front end. But if you have this, if it works best for you, whatever, you can still get the benefits of Blazor and yet have them as components on your MVC page. You can kind of mix and match. And this is something that ASP.NET Core does well pretty much everywhere else as well. We can bring in a Razer page Razer page, into our MVC application, or we can bring in API and now Blazor. Now let's first enable that runtime compilation. So we go to Startup. Like I said, it brought in a Nuget package. Let's see that right here. Under Packages, you'll see Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC.Razer.Runtime Compilation version 5. That's the Nuget package it added. That's all that checkbox did that we just checked. But if you go to Startup, you'll see down here the services.addController with views inside the configure services method. If we now say .add Razer runtime compilation, that will enable that runtime compilation for any changes we make to our project will get reflected the next time the page is loaded rather than the whole application need to be restarted. So that's a nice little feature that makes it a little easier to work with your changes and save them while the application is live and then see that reflected soon thereafter. So just a little thing there. It's not really the focus here, but I wanted to point that out. Okay, let's start enabling Blazor server for our MVC application. I do want to say right up front that you can enable either Blazor server or Blazor WebAssembly. It's up to you which one you do. I'm choosing to do Blazor server. I just prefer to have that as my my default, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't for MVC. So you can choose either one. There's a little bit of a tweak to do. WebAssembly is a couple different lines. And I will have the documentation on that in the description down below. So there's going to be links, a lot of additional links in this video compared to normal. There will be an additional link for more information on components inside of MVC or Razer pages. Just so you know, we're doing MVC here, but this will also work in Razer pages. So just want to point that out. All right, inside of views, we have shared, we have layout. This is where the actual HTML page gets designed. Okay, this is kind of the base of our application. Well, in here, in the head, we can put this pretty much anywhere. We want to add base href equals the tilde character and a slash. And then we need to close that out. So this is saying, this is for Blazor, and says that our website starts at the root of our domain, meaning there's no, it's not a folder or two deep. So you don't go, timco.com/test/ and that's where the website starts. So if you do have folder structure inside of your domain, then you need to put that folder path here. And again, the documentation on the website goes into more details on how you would do that. Not as common, but it is an option. Okay, let's scroll down to the bottom here. We have this section right here. It says render section async scripts. And what this is on every MVC page. So every view has the option of sending JavaScript for just that page. And that's where this gets rendered. It gets put in right here for that particular page. Well, right before this section, we want to add one more script tag. And script tags, it's important to put them in the right order, because what happens is one will override the other. So if you want to make sure you have them in the right order, that's why we have this last. It will override anything that's previous, and so on. Well, we're going to put right before this, the render section, we're going to say script, and we're going to say that the source equals, and we're going to say _framework / Blazor server JS. Now, you may say, but Tim, where is that file? It's not there. If you go looking for it, you're not going to find it. That's because this is actually inserted by the framework. This blazor.server.js, this is where our signal R works from. This is where that connection gets created and set up and all that kind of stuff. This is all the setup stuff around Blazor. And it's basically like bringing in .NET Core. It's just part of the framework that you bring in. So this is going to get inserted by the compiler when you produce this application for publishing. Next up, we need to add an imports file for our Razer pages. We're basically kind of building out the structure of what is normally in a Blazor application. So if you're familiar with Blazor applications, we have this _imports folder or file. So right click on MVC demo and say add new item. And we're going to search for Razer components right there, but you could search for just Razer in the search menu. And you want the name to be _imports. And you want that right at the root. So there's our imports.razer. You can get rid of all the code. And you want to paste in this right here, or type it in. I'm going to paste it in order to save you from watching me type this all out. This is boilerplate stuff. So this is what you get from any Blazor application, or at least these 7 lines. This is what essentially creates the using statements for our Razer components. So whenever you have any kind of C# code, if you look at, like, say, a home controller, you have these using statements at the top. Well, with Blazor, we have an imports file, and if it's at the root, because you can't have more than one, but if it's at the root, these using statements will be applied to every Razer component. So you don't have to keep typing using system.net.http in every Razer component. So these are our defaults. We're going to add one more, which is using MVC demo. And that will be different for every application. Notice that's the name of my project. That's the root namespace for our project. Okay, let's save that. We're going to close out of these two things. And we're going to go to the startup.cs. Whenever you're dealing with an ASP.NET Core or Blazor application, which Blazor really is part of ASP.NET Core, but whenever you're dealing with these applications, you're pretty much always going to go to startup.cs and tweak something, because this is kind of the heart of the application. This is where everything gets configured initially, whether it's dependency injection or anything else that's going on with our application. So it's important to know that what this file is and how it works. All right, the first place to go is under Configure Services. This is where dependency injection gets set up. We're going to add one thing here, which is services.add server-side Blazor. Again, this would be a change if you're going to do Blazor WebAssembly, but with us doing Blazor Server, then we add this entry right here. Also, down in endpoints, we're going to say endpoints, dot map Blazor hub. And this is the only configuration we do for Signal R. Now, if you want to do more configuration, you can, but this is where that Signal R configuration gets done, is just right there. It says, okay, set up that Signal R connection. And with that, we are pretty much set up to use Blazor inside of MVC. Now let's start with the simplest way of doing this. I'm going to right click on MVC demo. I'm going to say add, new item, Razer component, and let's select counter or type counter. And we're going to put this right in the root. Now we're not going to leave it here because I want to show you kind of the most basic way of doing this. It's just right in the root and how you'd go about doing that in your application. So that's our counter. And we're not even going to give it a path to go directly there. We're just going to use it as a component. So let's create an int I equals 0, and then private void increment counter method. Inside here, we're just going to say I plus equal 1. What that does is every time you run this method, it's going to add 1 to our integer. And we'll have a paragraph here that just has current count and then the I tag, the I variable. Then we'll have a button with a on click that is increment counter. And we're going to say class equals btn, btn-primary, and we'll just say click me, something like that. And that's really all there is to a Razer component, which is a Blazor object. A Razer component is really a couple different things. First of all, it's your HTML and Razer syntax mixed together, and then your code. And it's all in a .razer file. Now it's at the root. So let's go over now to our views, and let's go to our home view and index. This is the index page right here. And this is the standard boilerplate page. Let's do this. Let's create a new div. And inside this div, we're gonna put our component. And how we do that? Well, we say component render mode equals server pre-rendered. And then what we're going to say is type equals type of counter. Notice it came up in the IntelliSense list. And then we'll self-close that. So it's a little bit different than using it in Blazor, because in Blazor we would just say it's the counter. So you just say, right here you'd say counter, and that'd be it. Well, in MVC we have to say, actually this is a Blazor component, so let's go ahead and grab that, and by the way, let's specify the render mode. So we're gonna say the type of counter. That's the object we're gonna render. Let's go ahead and run this. So I'll hit run. And once this launches, we should see that on our main page is of course, start in the other window. Our main page is going to be a component. Let's zoom in here a little bit. There we go. There's our component that says counter, current count is 0, and click me. And if I click it, notice the page isn't getting refreshed. There's not a reload happening here, which is what would happen if it was an MVC thing, because MVC is all server side. And so you have to go back to the server, get the new page, bring it down, refresh the whole page. Well, not with this. We can just put a component from Blazor onto our MVC page and kind of have the best of both worlds. So if you've got an MVC application, you need to bring in some Blazor goodness, make it a little bit nicer and a little bit more JavaScript-esque without having to use JavaScript, this is the way to do it. But we're not quite done here. I do want to point out one thing that could be a tripping up spot here. And that is, what happens if you decide, you know what, I want to move that component off the root because the root gets so clogged up otherwise. Well, let's create a new folder. And we'll call this folder Blazor. And let's move the counter in there. Now, you can hit yes or okay to move it. It says it might take a long time. It's not going to take a long time unless you have a massive application, and it's a massive thing. But normally, if you move a class around, if you notice the home controller, it has a namespace here, and that's specified in code. So if you move this around somewhere else, normally it reflects the path. So MVC demo being the application or the project, and then controllers being the folder that's in. Well, if you move to a different folder, that namespace doesn't change automatically. You can use templates, or you can use IntelliCode and other things that get it changed for you, but by default, it doesn't change by itself. With this, there is no namespace specified. So it takes the namespace of the folder structure without having to explicitly say, this is the namespace, which means the namespace has changed. There's nothing in here that's saying, no, it's on the root. So if I were to try and run this application, we'd have a problem. In fact, let's try and do that. It says, no, we can't do that. We have an error. And the error list doesn't even show an error here. That's awesome. But it says we've got a failed build here. The type or namespace counter could not be found. So this right here, it's saying, no, I can't find that. So you have to change this. But if I just said Blazor.counter, that's not going to work either. And the reason why is because you're missing a part of the puzzle. And that is the name of your project, MVC demo.blazor.counter. Now it hasn't updated yet. Let's do a rebuild here and see if we can get that to update the, yes, enable IntelliCode, AI IntelliCode based upon my selection. Okay, so it will reflect this eventually. It got thrown off by the idea that I moved it. But if we run this application, it runs. And once this comes up, our counter is here and it works. So IntelliSense is a little bit behind the fact that I moved it. If you put it in the folder right way the first time, then it shouldn't have this speed issue. But just note that when it's not in the root, which is what I showed you first time, you can just say counter. When it's not in the root, you have to use the full namespace path, which starts at MVC demo, and then goes to the folder it's in, and then the name of the object. Sometimes if you close out the page and then reopen it, it will revisit the page and look at it and go, oh, okay, that's fine. And sometimes it won't. Just note that that might trip you up, but if you know what the full namespace is, it's not a problem. You can just type it out and it's fine. So full namespace starts with typically the project name. I say typically because you can mess with that and change the default namespace. Right click on your project, come down to properties, and you'll see the default namespace is MVC demo, which matches our project name. But you can change that if you wanted to. So just know when I say typically, that's why I'm saying it. So that's it for putting components from Blazor inside of a different system like MVC or Razer pages. All right, so that's all of the MVC stuff. I know you didn't come here to see MVC primarily. You came here to see Blazor. So let's right click on our solution and add a new project. I'm going to select a Blazor application, hit next. We're going to say Blazor, if I can spell it right, Blazor server demo. Because we're going to create a Blazor server demo. So this is Blazor server 5.0 for .NET, no authentication, yes, HTTPS, and we're going to hit create. Now, just like with any update to .NET Core, there have been some major speed improvements. You can go and look at those. I'm not big on doing benchmarks and comparisons because that's kind of nebulous. It depends on if it applies to you and how much it applies to you. If you're doing demo apps or smaller applications, you probably won't see much of a speed difference because it's just fast. It just works. But if you're building larger applications, then you're going to see a much bigger speed boost with .NET 5, just upgrading from .NET Core 3.1. So we're not going to go over that, but just know there's a lot of speed improvements both in Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly. What we're going to do first is we're going to go to the index page here, and I want to show off a couple little things. Well, one little thing and one bigger thing first, just to kind of get them out of the way and show that, yes, these are things we've been asking for. The first one, let's get rid of our survey prompt here, and let's create a radio button. Now, or radio options. I'm never really sure how to say that. They're options that are single select. So a radio option, you can only have one out of a set selected. So let's do a paragraph first. Inside a paragraph, we'll do an edit form, and we don't have a model yet. That's not a problem. And we're going to say input radio group. All right. And I'm going to close that out for now. We're going to put stuff inside of it in just a minute, but I really need to have a class to work with and some data. So let's come down here and say at code, and I am going to create a simple class. And so let's do this. Let's create the class. I'm debating putting it down here just because I want to show off this all in one spot instead of having two different spots for it. But I really hate showing you demo code where I say, don't do this. So in the data, let's do it right. Let's right click on data and say add class. And we're going to say demo model because this really is just for demo. It's not anything we're going to try and associate with a real world thing. I'm going to say int age. That's it. I'm just going to say that this is the age value. It's an integer, and that's really all it is. And then what we'll do is we'll save that and come back over here. I believe that if we go to the imports that we already have, oh, we don't. Look at that. Add using Blazor server demo dot data. Our using statement. Again, that's an imports.razor file. I just said, hey, everything in here has a using statement for it. So I can say private demo model, let's just call it demo, equals new open and close paren. Again, that's that new syntax where you don't have to say new demo model and repeat it twice. So that's what we're going to do there. And this will become our model that we use for our form and for our radio. So we initialize it to an empty model. And now we can come up here to our edit form and we can say model equals, just demo, like so. There's some telecode saying, yeah, it's probably what you want. And then inside the radio group, we're going to say the name equals age. Let's call it that. And then bind value equals, this is demo.age. So this is our overall model as demo. We're going to bind specifically to the age property of that demo object. We're going to call it age. Now, if you're not familiar with radio inputs, what they do is they're grouped by their name. So in theory, I could put radio inputs all over this page, not even together. As long as they point back to age, we're good to go. Now, with Blazor Server, you don't have to do this. You can take that off. And what will happen is, as long as you put your input radio objects inside of the open and the close for this radio group, it's going to say, I'm assuming that I belong to this parent right here. So it goes to the nearest parent. So just note that this is kind of more of a nicety, a formality to make sure we do it quote unquote right, but you don't have to do that. Now, input radio, well, actually, let's do this. Let's say user age, colon, and we'll do a break, which is a new line, and then we'll do a for loop. For I equals 0, I is less than, let's just do 35, and we'll start at 21. Is this, a valid scenario? Probably not. That's okay. We're just showing off what an input could do. So input radio, value equals I, and we'll close it out, and we'll say just say I, and then BR, and close. So what am I doing here? Well, inside of the input radio group, all this does is it says everything under me will be grouped to get every input radio under me will be grouped together as the age value and be bound to this age property. Remember that a radio input can only have one selected value. So if you have 10 values on the page, then you can only select one of those 10. Well, in our case, we're going to say, okay, inside there, we'll say that's user age. We'll put a break. This is not a pretty form by any means, but we're saying user age, colon, we'll put a break, and we'll have a list of options. And we'll say, first of all, that radio input, the value will be whatever I is. So start at 21 and go to 30, less than 35, so 34. And then right after the radio input, we're going to put the value that represents. In this case, just I again. And then we'll have a break so we don't have all these inputs right next to each other. They're one below the next. And that's all there is to the radio input radio. We run this. It should be that when we go to the main page, we'll have no. If we set this as startups first, and then we run this, it should be that the main page has our radio select on it. So go there and notice, again, not terribly pretty, but I can select the values. It does do this green for the green boxes around it for validation. And it's something that I would like to take off, and you can take off, but I wish it was off by default. But just note that's our input radio. Notice I can only select one at a time. Whatever one I've selected is going into that property. So now the age property says 22. Okay, so that's the input radio. Now I do want to show off one more thing with this Let's go back to our demo model, and I'm going to create actually a new class first. A new class, and I like to call this class enums. You can call it something else if you want, but I put all of my enums typically, or group them all at least, into one file called enums, or one file per section called enums. That way, when I'm looking to debug things, I know where to go. It doesn't really make sense to create a whole file for just a small enum, but it is what it is. So let's call this car type, and we'll say Ford, Toyota, Honda, and BMW. Okay. And it's not public class, it's public enum. That's better. And we can take the quotes off. Wow, I really bungled that, didn't I? There we go. Looking better. Always helps if you start off with the right type. Public enum car type. And it's Ford, Toyota, Honda, and BMW. Yes, I know there's lots more than that. This is just a demo. So with that enum set up, now I can use car type as an enum. Back over here in our demo model, we can say prop car type, and just say type of car, like so. And now we have a enum, which only has 4 possible options, or 4 possible values. So you probably love to set that up as a radio option, because that's a perfect sense, makes perfect sense for a radio option, because you can only select one. You don't have a Honda Ford, you have a Honda or a Ford. So let's create a new input. And actually, let's do it on top, because there's a lot of these. So let's put it up top here, and we're gonna say that this input radio group, we'll call this name equals car type, it's fine. And bind value is going to be demo.type of car. Then in here, we're gonna say car colon, we'll put our break, or our line feed, and then we'll do a for each. We're gonna say, let's just say C for car type in open paren, and we're gonna say car type, close paren. Oops, we're gonna have our open and close square brackets first. We're gonna convert this. So we're saying we're gonna cast it to an array of car type, and we'll say enum dot get values type of car type, like so. And we need one more close paren. We should be good to go. So what this does is it takes our enum, which has 4 options, and it says, get all the values for that enum. So get the values of this car type, and that's gonna come out as an array. So he says array, well, it's an array of car type. So that's our list of the options for our enum. Each one will go into C. So I can just say input radio value equals C. We can close that out and say C, display that, and then just break or line return. So with this, we've now said, okay, I think the first one's Ford. So it's gonna be Ford and is a value type, and that's gonna display Ford, and so on. Whichever one we select will then go into our value of type of car. So let's see that in action. Once it launches, there we go. Ford, Toyota, Honda, BMW. You can select which one you want to display, and that's the one that gets selected. So that's how you do an enum and display that on as a radio input. All right, so that's enough about the radio input. We can collapse that down. And let's talk about the one that's probably a little more exciting to you because it's one that I keep hearing people ask about, and that is file input. Now, there has been a Nuget package for file input. I showed that off in the Blazor server in-depth course where we used a Nuget package for file input kind of as a bonus thing. I said, this isn't baked into Blazor server yet, but it's coming, and here's what it's going to look like probably. And in the meantime, here's one that actually works. And so now it's baked into Blazor. There's a lot of stuff you can do with this. So let's start with a paragraph tag and say input file. And we'll say on change, and let's say on input file change, which we don't have yet. That's okay. We'll create that. And we'll say multiple. And we'll self-close that. So let's come down here and create in our code section a private async task, the on input file change. We want to have a input file change event args. Let's call them args, like so. So this is our input. And I said multiple here that I want to show just one way of doing this. And I want to show the most complete way. You don't have to do all of this. You can have it be a not multiple, in which case you can only select one file at a time. But I want to show you how to do multiple because I think you can figure out how to do a single file if you didn't do multiple. But with this, we can say, one file or many. You can limit the type. You can do a lot of different things. I'm actually going to show you one way because we could spend all day just on this input. What we're going to do is down here in the code, we're going to say private list of string. We're going to call this files equals, again, just that new syntax, which just news it up. And this is going to be the files we read in. We're going to read in just text files, and we're going to capture the value inside the text file and use that and display it on the page. Okay, just so we can see that, yeah, something got displayed on the page, and here's what it is based upon the files that you input. So let's, on this page, before our edit form, we're going to say for loop for I is less than files.count. I want to do a for loop because I want to have that identifier that says this is the file number. I'm going to say h2 file at I, let's do I plus 1 because you start at 0. So users don't necessarily want to see file 0. That kind of confuses them. So file 1, file 2 is much more easy for them. So therefore, we're going to add 1 to whatever I says. Note this does not change the value of I. That's what this does. This just changes what gets displayed. Then down here, we're going to say, let's create a paragraph tag. Inside there, we'll say files at position I. So that's going to give us each file, the text of it gets displayed underneath the header that says this is file 1, this is file 2. Okay? So down here in our on input file change, this is where all the work gets done. So the rest of it, the file picker, all that kind of stuff is all done for us. All we need to do is process the files coming in. So we're going to say var max files equals 2. So we're going to say maximum you can have is 2 files uploaded. That's it. And then var max size equals, we're going to give it a large file size. We're going to say 2 times 1024 times 1024. This is just for our scanning purposes to make it really easy to understand how large that is. That's 2 megabytes. How do I know? Well, 1024, that'd be 1 kilobyte. And then times 1024, that'd be 1 megabyte. And now times 2 is 2 megabytes. So I could do the multiplication on the calculator, get the final value, but you wouldn't know what that means. That's why we specify it this way. Just makes it easier to scan and read. Now let's do a for each on our, so var file in args.get multiple files, passing in the max files to say, hey, we're only gonna get 2 here. That's all we're gonna allow. Now we're gonna say using var file stream equals file.open read stream. Max allowed size is going to be max size. So this is going to open the stream for each file and say, yeah, but the max size is going to be 2 megabytes. So anything larger than that, you're not going to open it. Now note we're using this inline using statement. So what this does is this is going to close this using statement. It's going to close out the file stream properly at the end of the section it's in, which in this case is this curly brace right there. So that allows us to not have to nest using statements inside of using statements and have all these nested curly braces to manage. Next up, we're going to say using var stream reader equals new, we can just say new, and then say file stream, we're gonna pass that in. So let's call it reader, not read. Oops, I can't say new, I said var here. Stream reader, how about that? The problem is I think that I'm missing a using statement here, which I believe is system.io. So let's come up here to the top, and instead of adding to our import, so we're gonna say add using system.io, and that seemed to do the trick. Yep, we're good to go. So that's how you do a using statement if you want just in one page, is right up there. So now we're saying, okay, I'm gonna create a stream reader for my stream. We're assuming we're saying this is a text file. And now we're gonna say var file contents equals await stream reader dot read to end async and files dot add file contents. So we're gonna asynchronously read this file all the way to the end, and then we're gonna put the contents into our list. Now, I have not put any safeguards in place to make sure you don't give me a JPEG and I'm reading you the text of a JPEG, which would be wrong. So there's a lot of stuff you'd want to put around this. I didn't want to spend, again, a whole video just on this file input. I think that that's something we could do at another time. I just want to get you started in this and just point out, you want to put a lot of stuff around this to protect this. Okay? But with that, we've done a for each on every file. We have got the stream, turned it into a stream reader, which we then read to the end, grab the contents of that and put it into our list. Our list is being displayed on the page. We could even do up here a, wrap this thing around with a, hey, if it's empty, then don't even show this. But with the for, we don't have to do it because it's not even put on the page yet. So let's run this again. And once this loads, all right, so no files have been chosen yet. This is our new picker. But if we go to C:\demos, I have 2 files here. Let's highlight both of them, hit open. And now whoops, I need to make a change to that, but file 0 + 1, which would be 1. This is the data from the first list, and then file 1 + 1, that'd be 2. These are a few of my favorite movies. Hey, there you go. So we've loaded those 2 files based upon the files from disk. We brought them into Blazor server, so back to the server side, read them in, and used them on our page. We can also save these to the database. We could do a whole lot of other things, but that's the file picker. Again, you can take off the multiple if you wanted to. You can say, I want to allow more than that for the files. You can limit what types of files. You can change the size that are allowed, and then so much more. But just note those are the basics of how to use the file input. I will include a link for this as well so that you can find out more information about the input for file input, because there's a lot more you can do with this. There's a lot more you can tweak with it or play around with it. It's really powerful. And so you make sure that you kind of limit it a little bit and focus it in so that you don't assume users aren't going to give you bad stuff when they do. So make sure that you put a lot of stuff around that to protect yourself. Always, always, always remember, don't trust the user. Verify everything they give you and lock them down to doing only the right thing. That way they don't mess you up. All right, now at this time, I'm going to start this up one more time. I want to show off, let's do this. Grab this, and we'll grab this. And now we have our page up, it's running. And I say, you know what? I don't want to say hello world. I want to say hello YouTube. I hit save and nothing. Go back out and back in, nothing. It's still not updating. I'm not a big fan of that. How do I get a hot reload? Well, there's a way to do that. Kind of. And this is where, I saw it being demoed at the .NET Conf, and I couldn't figure out how to make it work. I mean, I tried. I looked at it, and this is one of those cases that really highlights the need to test things out, because I was sure I understood how hot reload worked. I'm like, cool, there's hot reload baked right into the product, so now I can make changes and bing, bang, boom, it all works. But this is where I really preach over and over again. You don't know something until you've done it. You can watch me do it all day long, but until you actually do it yourself, you don't fully know how to do it. Now, I try really hard to show you the ins and the outs and all the stuff around it, but there's still something to doing it yourself. It really helps you learn well. And it also exposes the things that you assumed that weren't true. And so when I went to do this, I'm like, I can't get this to work. And I checked settings, I checked preview features, I made sure I had the latest version of Visual Studio. A patch came out and I updated it. It still didn't work. I couldn't figure it out. And so I reached out to the person who's presenting at Microsoft. I'm like, hey, where is this? I missed it somewhere. I'm a bonehead. And he reached out and was like, well, it's actually not baked into the product yet. And so it's something that isn't in Visual Studio yet. Hot Reload is not yet in Visual Studio for Blazor. But there is a way of getting Hot Reload that gets you 90% of the way there. And that last 10% and it being baked in is coming in a soon future version of Visual Studio. So let me show you how to do the almost there, or the one it's pretty close. So here's what I do. I am going to close this out. I'm going to right click on my project. I'm going to say copy full path. I can also say open in terminal is another option, which is cool. Let's just do that. Let's just open in terminal. Oh, it's coming down here. Let's not do that. Let's go open the actual terminal, which I love. This is a great feature. So I'm going to say CD for change directory. I'm going to paste in that path. I'm going to take off this last section, which is the actual project name. Enter. So now I'm in the directory where my project is, okay? So let's clear this again. I'm going to say .NET. Now, if you don't know yet, everything in .NET pretty much is powered by the command line. In fact, I think everything is at this point. So when you're doing anything in Visual Studio, there's a command line version of that. And a lot of times, Visual Studio is actually running the command line version of that. Not all the time, but a lot of times. So the reason for that is not because Microsoft thinks that command lines are old school and awesome, which they kind of do probably, but The reason why command line is such a big deal is because you can automate a command line. You can't really automate clicking over here and right-clicking and going to properties. There's tools that will help you do that, but then if your screen resolution is off, it gets wonky. So with a command line, you can run all these commands and automate everything, which is really critical for continuous integration, continuous deployment, CI/CD, because you want to do things like build your application or bring in Nuget packages or even create full projects you can do at the command prompt. So I've brought up the Windows terminal. The Windows terminal right now is an install you have to do through the, I believe the Microsoft Store, but you can also just open up the command window, just type CMD in the run command for Windows. So you hit the Windows key and just type command or CMD and hit enter, and it will launch a command prompt for you. Or you can open PowerShell or your command line of choice here. So let's say .NET, because that starts off and says, okay, this is a .NET command. I'm going to say watch, run. So what's going to happen is, since we're in the project that I want to start, and I say .NET run, it's going to run the project. When I say .NET watch run, it's going to run the project, but it's going to watch it as well, which means basically hot reload. So I hit enter. Now, one of the nice things here as well is that since I have done this, it's going to launch the browser too. So now the browser, let's move it over here. Let's put Visual Studio, and we'll bring the command prompt back up. So this looks a lot like Kestrel, right? Because it is. It's Kestrel. So it's running Kestrel on my console until I hit Control-C, in which case it will stop the web server. But if I come over here, whoops, there we go. If I come over here, let's unpin this, and it says hello YouTube, but let's change this back to world. And I hit Control-S to save. It's going to say, hey, now it's control world, or hello world. It did have to reload the page, which means that if I had an option selected, let's say BMW is selected and 29, and I say, oh, nope, you know what? YouTube fam. Hit S, Control S. Then Ford is selected and no age is selected down here. So it had to refresh my page, which that's the not ideal part here, because with Blazor server, you can have a lot of state on your page that doesn't get saved. So just note that's kind of the downside of here, but with that .NET watch run, you can have that hot reload experience where you really play around, tweak stuff. I love this option when I am working with HTML and CSS specifically, because I am not an HTML or CSS guru. All right, I am especially not the visual part of it. I can do all these things. I know how to do, I can pretty much do whatever you want me to do, but coming up with the idea ahead of time and knowing, oh, I want, this hex code for color, and that's not me. I have to play around and tweak it. And so what I do typically is I open my browser tools and I start tweaking things. Well, with this, I can come down here and say, well, that really needs to be wrapped in a paragraph tag. So let's do that. Or take this and move it up into here. Now I hit save and look at that again and go, well, that's better. But this probably should have a box around. I can keep tweaking and playing to my heart's content to get what I want on the page. Now, when you're done, come back to your terminal, Control-C to close it, exit the application, which it's going to say attempting to reconnect. It's not going to find it. You can just close it out at this point. So there we go. And maximize that again. So that's how to use the .NET Watch to get yourself close to that, those minor changes, the hot reload in Blazor server. The only downside is it does not remember state, and so it is going to lose any changes you've made on the page. Okay, we've got a few more to show. I'm gonna try and go quickly through a few of these because they're smaller, but they're still important. And before we get to the end though, I do want to hang in there because the last one I've got coming is awesome. Virtualization and showing off 50,000 records on the page at the same, not exaggeration, 50,000 records on the page is, I think, gonna blow your mind, blew my mind, just how awesome this is. So hang in there, we're gonna get to that. But for now, let's look at a couple more smaller things. So the next one I want to show off is the focus option. So let's go over to the counter. This is our basic counter page. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple of inputs. One above the counter. So let's input up here. And we're going to say input. And for right now, I'm just going to close this out. And then we're going to have, after our click me button, I'm going to have another input. So what I want to do is every time I click this button to increment the count, based upon whether the count is even or odd, I'm going to put my cursor inside of either this input or this input. Okay? So the first thing I have to do is specify a reference to these inputs. So I'm going to say private element reference test input, and let's do the same thing again. I'll copy this line and say test input 2. All right, so there's now my references. Up here I'm going to say at ref equals test input. I'll do the same thing down below, where I'll say this is test input 2. So this right here creates a reference that I can talk to this input. And this one down here creates a reference I can talk to this input. Now, inside of my counter, I can now assign which one I'm going to set the focus to. So let's change this first to a async task because we're going to do some async calling here. The focus is only asynchronous, so the set focus. So in here, after we set the count, I'm going to say if current count modulus 2, so %2 equals 0. Now, if you're not familiar with the modulus or the modulo, I think it is, character, this percent character. What this does is it divides current count by this number. And if there is no remainder, then it'd be equals 0. So it gives it a remainder. So let's just say this was 3. So 3 divided by 2, 3 goes into 2 one time. But there's a leftover, there's a remainder. And that remainder is 1. Well, the modulus character says only give me the remainder, what's left. So it'd return 1. Well, 1 is not equal to 0, therefore it's odd. But if you divide by 2 and there is no remainder, it's even. So await test input dot focus async. So if it's even, set the focus on the top input. If it's odd, then test input 2 dot focus async. I'm just doing 2 because I want to show off that it would change and not, it's not just assume that, well, that's what the page does. So we're going to show off that, yes, this does change when you click the button every time. So this can be really helpful if you want to, let's say, validate a form and say, oop, you forgot something, and you can send them right back to that field on the form. So and there's a lot of other options as well, but let's go look at this in action. So once this comes up, we'll go to the counter page and notice the input before, the input after. I'm gonna put my cursor down here, doesn't really matter. Actually, I'm gonna click out of it. Click, notice my cursor is now in this box. Click again, notice the cursor's up here. Click again, back and forth it goes. So this is changing the focus because of this line right here. Await the element reference and focus async. Just a little change, but it's something that can be really helpful in certain circumstances. All right, let's hit stop. And now we're going to look at optional parameters and catch-all parameters. So this is one that people really wanted. They wanted to have the idea that they could have an optional parameter. Because right now, if you put a parameter up here, you have to, beforehand, it was locked in that, okay, you have to pass a value in for that. But now we can say, you know what? Let's create a parameter. Let's come down here and create it first. So we would first say parameter, and then we would say public int with a question mark at the end, which means a nullable int. Start count, and we have our get and our set. So it has to be public. It has to be, if you want to be optional, you have to say nullable, because if it's not nullable, then you've got a problem, because if it's optional and they don't pass one in, it wouldn't work. So now in my counter up here, I can say slash in curly braces start count colon int question mark, meaning the type is a nullable int, and this now makes it optional. And what that means is I'm not locked into having to pass in a parameter. I can say, you know what? I'm not passing in a parameter at all. In fact, I haven't changed anything yet as far as the code to deal with this or anything else like that. I'm not going to pass anything in. I'm just going to run this and just treat it like it was before, and it should work. So go to counter, it goes right there. Click it, it increments the counter, it changes the focus, we're good to go. So nothing's really changed here, even though I've now added this parameter. If I had made this an integer, like we used to have to do, and I run this, and I try and go to the page, it's going to say, I can't find that page. I'm sorry, there's nothing at this address, because it's looking for that /2 or whatever the value would be. So that's where now optional parameters allow us to specify optional parameters, okay? If this was a string, you wouldn't have to specify the type. You would just say the string value and a question mark at the end, okay? But since it's an integer, we have to specify the type, including the question mark for, again, optional or nullable. Now, let's actually use this in some way. Let's come down here and we're going to say protected override. We'll say on parameter set, not the asynchronous version, just the on parameter set. That always messes with my, I haven't figured that out yet. Messes with my formatting. You can get rid of the base.onParameter set. But here we can say if, I'm going to keep this verbose. You can make this much tighter if you wanted to, but it depends on how easy it is for you to read. Start count, which that's our optional value, is not null. I love the is not here. This makes me so happy. That makes me so happy. We used to be able to say is null, and we have to do an else there for not null. Or you have to say bang equals. But is not null just makes it read so nicely. So if it's not null, then current count equals, you have to cast this to an integer, start count. If you just pass in, it's nullable, even though you've verified it's not null. The fact that you have done this in 2 lines means it doesn't trust it. So you have to say, no, it really is an integer. So the only difference between a nullable integer like this and an integer is the presence of null or not. Since we verified there is no null, therefore we can say, yes, it actually is an int as well. So now, if we run this, again, it's nullable, so we can go right to it. So counter, and the counter is 0. But I can say /counter /52. And now the current count is 52. So that's now an optional route. I can take that out, go back to it, and it's 0. So that's an optional route. And there's one more type of route we want to talk about, and that is the catch-all parameter. And this is we're gonna do this on the same page, but I want to keep this in here to show off kind of a step on each other's toes thing. So let's come down here and create another parameter. And this is going to be a public property of a type string. It has to be a string. And we're going to call this, let's call it custom route. And what this will be is our custom route is specified. So we're going to say this is going to catch all route. So page page, open quotes, counter / test. Let's add an extra thing here. And then we're going to say open curly braces, star custom route. Like so. So this is something new, this star right here. So we're saying custom route, that corresponds to this string right here, but star means everything after this. So everything after the slash, you have counter / test, everything else gets captured. So let's up here, after our input, before our counter, we're gonna create a paragraph tag. We're gonna say, let's just say custom, actually let's do an @ here, custom route, like so. Let's put an H tag on top of this, H2, custom route. Just so we know what the route is. Now again, we can hide this if the custom route is null or empty, but we're not gonna do that. We're just gonna leave it like so. And let's run this. I wanna show it off first, and then we'll talk about what this is. So we go to counter right now. It says the custom route, and there's nothing here before counter. But if I were to say let's say /53 first, and it changes the current count, right? But if I say /test / this is a test of the emergency broadcast system, like so, which first of all, spaces aren't allowed in a URL. So that's gonna change that URL to have %20 for spaces, but that's my route now, right? See, there's our %20s. So it changed my URL, but also notice this is a test of the emergency broadcast system. It put that as the custom route, grabbed all of that. Well, what if I did this? Let's take that off. And we're gonna say /test / this / is / my / test. It grabbed all of it. This / is / my / test, which looks like a normal URL. A little better format. We can kind of, spread it or delineate it that way, but it grabs everything after /test. Because it says anything after /test, that's the custom route. So it grabbed all of that. How is that helpful? Well, if you want to pass in and handle multiple routes on one page, where you say, I just want to get the information off that route, and I'll use that to determine what gets displayed on this page, but really it's one page, but it's handling multiple things. You can do that now. So that's our catch-all parameter. Now, I did say I want to leave it on the same page. I want to step on some toes. If you just said /counter, like so, notice that both of these have /counters. One has the start count and one has the custom route. What's going to happen here? This is one of those things where testing is so important, because when you do a test project and try these things out, try to break it, see what happens, because you'll have a much better understanding of the objects that you're working with. So custom route is nothing, counter is nothing, but let's just do our /54. Counter is 0, custom route is 54. That custom route overrode my my route that has the integer, even though I passed in integer. So just note, you really want to have some kind of delineator or something else if you already have parameters right off the main part of your path. So that is a catch-all parameter. Actually, this highlighted right here is an optional parameter. This is a catch-all parameter. And you can use either of those now inside of Blazor. All right, this next one is a lot of fun. And it's one that I can't wait to use in some of my applications. And that is encrypted browser storage. This can't be easier. This is Blazor server. Okay, so it's both server side and client side. It has a foot in each world. What happens is it uses Signal R to communicate to the front end. And the front end just has a little bit of JavaScript that talks to Signal R and displays the updates on the page. It's really the best of both worlds. It's got the security of your server side, but yet it's got the interactivity of the client side. I love Blazor Server. I think it's the best template Microsoft has created for the web. But Blazor WebAssembly has the option of interacting with local storage because it's got the ability to talk to JavaScript, and JavaScript can talk to local storage. But now we have the option to talk to local storage even on Blazor Server. And not only that, we could talk to local storage and have it be encrypted, so the user doesn't have direct access to manipulate and change it. Now, to be clear, you still don't want to save sensitive data to the client side. But if they already have access to the data, you can store it in local storage or session storage. Now, if you're not familiar, the browser has this concept of storage that the websites can use. Now, this storage is unique to the website, so that if Microsoft.com, if you were on there and they were storing stuff in local storage or session storage, and you came to IamTimCorey.com, I would not have access to the session storage or local storage of Microsoft.com. I'd only have access to IamTimCorey.com's local storage or session storage. Now, it depends on the browser how much storage space you get, but I think the recommendation or the default is 5 megabytes maximum. Megabytes, not gigabytes, because think about this, every website has access to stored data on your machine. Also note that this storage is volatile, meaning that at any point it can go away. You cannot say that your application would fail without the data that's stored there. Your application has to say, okay, I can still get data from the server. This is only a convenience thing. It's not a long-term thing you want to use. So just note that one of the big ways that this can be used is, if you have a multi-page form where you don't want to save it to the database, but you don't want the user to lose their place, you can store things in the local storage temporarily until you get that last page. And then you can, make sure that even if they close the browser out and come back later, that you've saved all their answers, they can continue on. That does bring up the case of local storage versus session storage. And I'm giving you a blazing 2-minute tutorial on this stuff, okay? There's a lot more to learn, but I do want to get through and at least help you understand the basics. So I am working on a series on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that will illuminate all these things a lot more in depth. But session storage only lasts until you close your browser. Once you close your browser window, that session goes away and it destroys everything in session storage. It even will not remember between sessions. So if you have a session open in Firefox and another one open on a different tab in Firefox, it won't remember between the two. Local storage is a little more permanent. And by a little more permanent, I mean you can close your browser out, you can close your tabs out, you can come back to it later, and it will still remember that it's there. Mostly. If the user clears their session store or local storage, then it'd be gone. If the browser clears it out, or if they use a tool that cleans their PC, a lot of PC cleaners, the big thing they do, which isn't really a big thing, is they clean out local storage caches, which really is more harmful than helpful. But that's in a nutshell what local storage is. So what we're going to do is on this already abused page for counter, we're going to abuse it a little more, and we're going to put some storage. So remember what the current count is. So let's do this. Let's actually create a new counter because we've already abused this a lot. So let's create a new Razer component, and we'll call this counter2. And we're going to bring in let's not even do anything. Let's just do it ourselves. Private int current count equals 0 to start off, and private void increment count. And we'll say current count plus equals 1. And then we'll set up our, let's actually put a paragraph. Current count, and we'll say current count. And then we'll have our button. Class equals btn dash primary. And we'll say that on click equals increment count. And we'll say click me. Okay, there we go. So there's our counter 2, and we'll put that right in, I think index is still pretty clean. Yeah, close enough. Nope, let's create our own page. So we'll just say that the page directive, page, I keep saying equals, and it's not equal. Counter 2, okay? So that's now our URL for our counter, and we can go directly and we type it out, that's fine. Oops, I took away the opening tag for that, or opening angle bracket. So that's counter 2. It's back to the basic counter page. But what we want to do is we want to remember this even after you close the browser. So we're going to use local storage. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to inject this user dependency injection system, protected local storage. We'll call it storage. And it's yelling at me saying, hey, I can't find that. No problem, let's come down here to imports, and we'll add one more. We'll add it after this virtualization here, because at using Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.components.server.protected browser storage. Okay, so long name, but that comes from Microsoft. You just type in that using statement. It's better to do it here on the imports than it is to try and put it up here, because that'd be so super long. So this is protected local storage. Notice the local in there. If you wanted session storage, protected session storage. Let's call it session, okay? We'll leave both of these in here, and I'm gonna flip between the two so you can see the difference. But just note that you only need one of those unless you wanted to store them both for some reason, which you probably wouldn't. At least not for the same data, okay? So now in our current count, what I wanna do is I want to start with the increment count. I'm gonna say that after we increment the count, so after you push the button once, I'm going to await, which means I have to change this to async task. The nice thing about, task. The nice thing about Blazor is you can change all these methods over to async without really breaking anything, because the onClick, it handles awaitables versus non-awaitable just fine. So we're gonna say await storage, not session, storage.setAsync. You have to give it a name. We'll do that in just a minute. And then the value. So the name, it should be something unique. I'm gonna call this counter2 for the page dot current count. So that's the page name and then the variable name. That's what I'm storing here. That's the string name I'm giving it. You could just call it current count. The problem is that if you're using local storage somewhere else in this application, then you'd have to differentiate between the two. So this way, it's understandable. The syntax is to know that it's going to be this page, this variable. Okay, that's all there is to using local storage. That's it. And the cool thing is that's encrypted. So the user can't even read it and modify it. Now, we're saving it, but we need to read from that. So let's do this. Protected override on initialized async. We may need to make that async task. And let's fix our formatting here. And no need for the return here. What we're going to do is say var result equals await storage dot get async. Let's going to type int. And what's the path to get? Well, counter2 dot current count, which we can just copy and paste from down here. That'd be fine too. That'd probably be better because of the fact that you're not having to worry about typing errors. Now, current count equals result dot success question mark result dot value :0. Now, this is a one-liner. It's something I don't often do. I typically try to break this out. This would be an if statement. Okay, so I'm saying this value here. If this value is not null, then put the value in current count. Result.value is the actual value coming back from result. Okay, so bool success is a true or false. If it was not successful in getting, if it was successful, get the value. If it was not successful, put 0 in the current count. Okay, so that's what that's doing. It's an if statement. If this is the Boolean true or false value, this is the if successful, and then this is the else statement value instead. All right, and either of these values will then get assigned to current count. So it's a one-liner, but it's quick and easy, and I think that you can understand what's going on here. All right, so this is our counter2. Let's go ahead and go to shared and nav menu, and just let's copy this and paste it and say href is counter2 and say counter2. I don't want to have to keep typing it in the browser. So let's launch this. This is using local storage. So let's maximize this. And counter2, there's our counter2, current count is 0. Click me, works like normal, right? Let's go to counter and click it for a few times. So counter's at 6. Go back to counter2, it's at 4. Come back, counter is 0. And the reason why, I mean, normally you don't remember things between going to the page and coming back. But we're reading this from local storage. Let's hit F12 here to bring up our browser tools. And if we open up Application tab, you'll notice local storage here. For this path, you'll see, let's see if we can zoom in here a little bit. Counter2.current count, the value, this is the value. All right, that's a pretty hefty value. Now, let's do this. Okay, so there you can see the whole value. Let's click it a few times and watch, see the values changing. So it's remembering that, and if you go off and we come back, it remembers the value, but that value is encrypted. Now, let's copy this URL. Let's go to a new tab and paste it in. And it goes, whoa. And it blows up because it's saying, hey, it can only be called during on after render async. That may be an issue we can fix. Let's hit refresh here. Yep. So let's do this. Well, first of all, let's close it out. We're gonna fix that on initialize. I think let me just do this on after render async. Let's run it again. Nope. Protected, override, on after render. First render is, gotcha. So bool is first render or just first render. Okay, we didn't have to specify, but you need to be precise than the variable name, but that should work. Nope. Yep. Okay, it works. Counter 2, nothing. Okay. Whoop, there we go. Come back, and that's not right. So the original was correct, and I'm not sure why that was yelling out before. Let's get back these out. So let's try it again. This is a little wonky. I'm not quite sure. It worked in my demo, which of course it did. Counter 2 is at 19. Cool. 23. Cool. That works. Let's do this. Let's go to another page. Copy this. Go over here. Go to another page. Counter 2. It says 23. This says 23. Click this a few times. Notice this is off because it's only doing that when the page first renders. I'm not sure why you had that error before, but it's working now. But now if we come back over and come back, notice it says 24. That's because the last value I saved to was 24. So if I go to 34 and this over here is 24, if I hit click me, it's going to save the value and overwrite the local storage. But if I just go off and come back, it now says 34. So just note that with multiple pages open, you can overwrite one and cause a problem for the other, but this is only for a specific user on a specific machine that this will be a problem. So this is only for me. It's not local storage is on my personal computer. If you were to run the same web application on your machine, let's just say I had this, published publicly, then it would not use my local storage, it'd be using your local storage. So just note that. So 2 different pages, but I can get the value from both on either side. So that's what local storage does. And again, if I stop it and I start again and I come back to that value, it's going to still be there, 34. So now let's change from storage, local storage, over to session storage. So I'm just going to take this and wherever it says storage, I'm going to change it to session. Those 2 places. Okay, that was it. Let's run this. And now we're going to see that the counter 2 is 0. I click it a few times, 7. Come back to it, it still says 7. If I take this URL and go to a different tab, go to counter 2, it says 0. Click it a few times, it says 4. Click it a few times, it says 11. Back over here, it still says 4. This still remembers 11 because each tab is its own session. And if I were to close this out and I were to start up, since of course this is a brand new tab, it's going to not have that value, so it does not remember that session value. Hit F12, you can come over here to session storage, and you'll see that there is a key there as well. Notice local storage is still there because local storage remembers even past the browser closing. So that's still there, but we're not accessing it because we're not accessing local storage anymore. Now, you can delete this. You can say clear, it clears it out. So you come back to it and it says 0 again. Notice it didn't fail because it's fine. It says, hey, if I couldn't find it, I'll say 0. But now that it's there, it's going to remember that when I come back to it. So right click and say clear on both of these. And now there's nothing in either value. You'll get a 0 every time you come to it. So that's why you don't want to rely on local storage, but at the same time, it can be really helpful for these quality of life interactivity things. All right, that's enough about that. Let's get to the big one. And this is, people often ask me, you're like, well, Tim, I want to show a ton of data on the screen. I want to have hundreds or thousands of records. And my first reaction to that is don't. Because you're treating the the web browser like it is a desktop client. And you can drag the browser to its knees and say, well, it's the browser's problem. It's not the browser's problem. You were pretending it's a desktop client when it's not. There's a reason why desktop clients still exist, because they bring you power that the web simply does not have. But there is a case where you might say, well, yes, but I have to show a certain number of records, a lot of records on the screen. And while I still cringe and I still say there's better ways of doing that, you can pretend they're all there and just say, hey, fetch the next 10 when they ask for the next 10. There is still the case where you can show a lot of records on the screen. So we're going to abuse Blazor today. Okay, so if we run this application, and I keep running this application, but if we run this, we go to the fetch data. We have 5 rows here with 4 columns, okay? So the dates and the times, cool. But what if we were to take that up to the next level? So right now, this is just get forecast async, which is in the weather forecast service. This is a dummy thing. It's just creating a task from result with a range of 1 to 5. Cool? Well, instead of 1 to 5, what if we said 50,000 and run this? Okay. Now you saw how snappy that opened up the Blazor page before. Let's click this now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 seconds or so that opens up this page. But that's understandable. I mean, look at this data. I mean, we've got data going into, well, wow. Let's scroll down here. I'll be dead, okay? This is October 29th of 2157. It should be mild, okay? I don't care. I'll be dead. My kids will be dead. But maybe, yes. Yes, we did. That's a long way in the future, all right? But it took us generously, it took us at least 8 seconds, probably more than that, to load this data. We can do better than that. So let's not change anything here. We're gonna leave 50,000 records being generated. Again, I would recommend against that because it's way too many records to have in the browser. The browser has to remember them. It's got to work with them. Your browser only has so much power. People complain about how slow Chrome is or how much memory it takes. You may be part of the problem with that if you're loading 50,000 records, but you can do it. And I am showing off 50,000 records because I want you to see that difference. That 8 seconds that it took to load the page. Let's come down to our fetch data page. We're not going to change anything about the code, okay? We're not gonna change, all we're gonna do, we're gonna comment this out, all right? And we're gonna put in a new section here. Instead of this for each, we're gonna say virtualize. The items are the forecasts. And the context equals forecast. This is basically a for each. So how we said, for each forecast in forecasts, well, the list or the items are forecasts, and the context is the individual item that you're going to put the value into for your for each. So forecast is what we called it. You can call it anything you want. So we can actually just take and copy this and paste it in. So it's the same HTML layout. It's just instead of saying for each, we've changed that to virtualize and items and context, okay? That's it. Let's hit run. So again, we're using the same code, same call, same 50,000. Boom, it's done. It's loaded. And if we scroll down, we can still scroll down, okay? It's still all there. It's just that it loaded practically instantly. So let's see what's going on under the covers. So let's hit F12, go back to our elements here, and notice this on the upper left-hand corner, there's this select an element in the page to inspect it. Click it, And we're going to inspect this first item here. And that brings us up to the first row in our table. And notice, let's zoom out here a little bit. I know you probably can't read that real well on the screen, but what that does, it shows you that you have, however many elements that is, okay? Not 50,000. All it has is these elements. And let's open up this first one. And notice where it says 12.7, okay? So this is the number of elements we have. Let's scroll down here for a bit. Notice that first, that date changed to 7.8, not 12.7, which 7.8 is about 7 or 8 above this value right here on the page. So we have pretty much the same number of items on the page. It's just that we're changing which values are in here. Okay? So that's all we're doing. Okay? It's changing which elements are displayed in the page. The rest aren't displayed, but they're there. They're behind the scenes. Now, this can be even more intelligent. It can actually fetch from your API the next 10 or the next 20, whatever you want to do, and do that. So it's not even like you're storing it on your user's client machine. But for us, we're just saying, hey, I want to load irresponsibly 50,000 entries onto the page. No problem. It's going to render it and be super responsive. All right. So you can play around this. You're going to have a problem like this. Notice how when I scroll, it doesn't quite scroll how I expect it to because it's trying to keep up. But my goodness, it is. All right. So we're down to, there's the last entry right there, even though we only loaded a few at a time. So super responsive. If I hit the page up button, I can just crank through these and it renders them all just fine. Now, again, just to clarify and make sure you understand, the big difference here is if we comment this out and change this, and if we run this, what's happening is it's putting every item on the page. Even if it's not watching those items, which it is, but even if it's not watching those items, what's going to happen is it's got to create a record on the page for each one. This page now is massive. If we hit F12, it takes a long time to render. Select the first element in the list. There's our row, right? But look at each row is actually physically on the HTML page. Show all nodes, 49,500 more to show. It's not even showing us in this display because there's just so many. So yeah, it's kind of cool that it finally put it on there, but we can have a much better responsive time if we use just virtualize. So just change from a for each to a virtualize, and your responsiveness is practically instantaneous. So again, just a demo, make sure you got it. Boom, page loads. Boom, load it again. Load it again. Now, if your API is not a test API that's local, but instead is an actual API, and you try and call your API and get 50,000 records down, it doesn't matter what kind of optimizations you have on the Blazor side, it's going to take a while to transfer that much data across the wire. So just note you won't see instantaneous response there. But that's not Blazor's fault anymore. That's the fault of your API, not the fault of your API. It's the fault of you. But it's the transmission of the data itself that's taking the time. Once the data is down, it'll instantly show on the page, or practically instantly. So that virtualized tag, even though it's practically nothing when it comes to writing the code for it, it's a huge deal. So it's basically a for each, and it's going to virtualize your display and only display just in time what it needs to. It's going to display a few more at the top and a few more at the bottom so you can scroll. And while you're scrolling, it goes, oh, we need to start moving and putting new stuff in the list and moving things around, and it will do it for you. So really cool, really big on performance benefits. Again, I would encourage you, if you need to use the virtualize, first look at your data and see if this is the best way of doing it. And if you're really embracing the web, or if you're trying to do desktop stuff, and if you might not be able to do it a different way. Okay, so there are ways of doing things a little more efficiently. I would encourage you to do that. Do whatever you can to be efficient, but at the same time, Blazor is going to do what it can to be efficient as well, so that your users get that really snappy experience they're looking for with the client-side interactivity, and yet, again, the server-side, both safety and security, as well as processing. So that's my list of the things that I just pulled out from the Blazor changes. There's more changes beyond this that has happened. I'm going to do a video sometime in the future. I'm not sure if it'll be before the holidays or not, but just on authentication, because some authentication changes have been made. I do want to get into that, and there's some really cool stuff going on there. But you know, there's just so much stuff that happened in Blazor, and part of that's because Blazor's a newer thing, but it is production ready. People keep asking me that. Is Blazor production ready? Yes, absolutely. If it gets released into a .NET release, it's production ready. All right. So when Blazor got released, it was production ready immediately. So Blazor server has been production ready for over a year. Blazor WebAssembly has been production ready since May of 2020. And now that it's been out for a little while, the requests for changes have come through, and we've added more things. There is one more thing. I almost forgot about this. I do want to cover it, even though we're going long here, but I think it's important stuff. There's one thing, I think it was one of the most requested things of Blazor, and that is CSS isolation. So let's talk about that just briefly. So the idea behind CSS isolation is that we can make a modification to the CSS of just a Blazor component without having to change the CSS for our entire application. Let's see what I mean by this. Now, if you're not familiar with CSS, cascading style sheets, basically it's a way to format your stuff, okay? Now let's come at the very top of site.css. This is our CSS document for our entire site for our Blazor application. Now, what if I wanted to change the H1 tags and say that the color is going to be red? All right. If I did that, then when we run the application, let's run this. We're going to see that every H1 tag is now red. So hello YouTube fam, counter 2 is not, because I use an H2 tag there. Fetch data is the weather forecast, that is red. But I'm like, man, I don't want to do that. I want to just be the H1 tag for the counter page. That's it. Okay. Or the fetch, let's do the fetch data. So the fetch data page. The fetch data page, I want that to be red, but I don't want to affect any other page. Now, what you could do is you could change this to say, okay, well, it's an H1 tag, but it's got a special class, and you give it a custom class name. That's one way of doing it. But what you can do is you can come down here and see if we have fetchdata.razor. Well, if I right click on pages and I say add, new item, I'm going to add a CSS item. So I'm going to search for CSS. And let's say fetch data.razor.css. Now notice it's going to nest that right underneath the Razer page. All right. And then in here, I can say, let's grab that H1 tag. Let's cut it out of here. And let's put it here. And say the H1 tag is going to be red. But that's just for fetch data. It's named fetchdata.razor.css. Now let's run our application. And we see that hello YouTube fam is black. So is counter, but fetch data is red because that CSS only applies to this component. All right. So that's CSS isolation. There's times for this. I'm not going to use this a ton. Okay, let me put it that way. There are times when CSS isolation is really great, especially you're bringing components together from one application to another. However, in general, I would like to see it be mostly if you have one application, then use your site.css and just style it based upon custom div or custom classes. So it depends on the scenario and how you're using components. So don't just think this is for everything. Whenever you want to style a component, you have to use a CSS isolated class. You don't have to. You can use site.css and then just like anything else with HTML, you can dial it into the specific items you want to modify based upon custom class names. So just note, it's not a removal of site.css. It's just that we can now say for a specific component, here's the styling I want. All right. So that was your bonus thing. There's just so much in Blazor that has changed, and all the stuff that I've talked about all works for Blazor WebAssembly. So I said Blazor throughout because it's Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly, even though I did it on Blazor Server. But just know you can do it on both. All right. So that's our whole demo. This is the things that I picked out of the changes for Blazor in .NET 5 that I found really impactful and really exciting. I hope you enjoy it. Is there anything you thought I missed or you want to see covered? Of course, authentication is coming. That's a big one. But is there anything else you saw that you kind of want to see? Maybe JavaScript isolation, which is also in here, or something else. Let me know. All right. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking through the end. I appreciate it. I appreciate a thumbs up on this video if you enjoyed it. Maybe even share it as well. All right. As always, I am Tim Corey.